afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this web event. My name is Bob Boulay. I'm a senior consultant here with ownCloud, and I'm going to be walking you through today's presentation, getting started with ownCloud. Really straightforward presentation. Hopefully we'll be able to deliver everything that you came to see. If for some reason, guys, there is something that you don't see and you were hoping to, please feel free to let us know. Also, questions. If you have questions, you have comments, using the Q&A section or the question section in the GoToWebinar client is preferable, so we can go ahead and capture those things. We're going to try and get to as many questions as we can live. But any that we don't get to, we are going to be able to guarantee you answers. So we will follow up with you. So if you don't hear your question answered live, never fear. We will get back with you. We'll get an answer to your question, and we'll move forward from there. So with that said, guys, let me go ahead and jump into sort of the presentation proper. To start off with, guys, and I always like to review this information as I go through and do these presentations, talking about the Dropbox problem and really trying to help everyone understand or put some parameters around the problem that ownCloud is trying to solve. Any and all of you that are familiar with what Dropbox is, how Dropbox works, you probably actually love Dropbox. You probably love the idea of being able to access your files from any PC, being able to access your files from a tablet or from a phone, being able to collaborate with people externally. All of those great things that are associated with Dropbox, ownCloud is attempting to bring to the table, or ownCloud is bringing to the table. But the difference here, the key differentiator here is control of that unstructured data. ownCloud is doing it on-premise, giving you as the system administrator or you as the person responsible for compliance, or you as the person responsible for data security, complete control of that data. So now the data is not off floating around in the public cloud somewhere. It's not in a situation where you can't, if you're sitting in front of an auditor, say with absolute certainty where that data lives, who's accessed that data. These are all the problems that ownCloud aims to solve while providing you with all of the great features and functionality that Dropbox would bring to the table. So we give you the ability, or your end users the ability, to go ahead and access data from a mobile device, share through a link with an external collaborator. However, as an administrator, we're guaranteeing you know where that data lives, who's accessed that information, by presenting it to you with an on-premise solution that you can drop into your private cloud infrastructure. So what is ownCloud? And again, I think it's important to sort of define this prior to we dive into sort of how to get started with it. Really thinking about ownCloud as that enterprise version of Dropbox. So that on-premise, extensible version of a product like Dropbox. So it's the enterprise version of essentially a consumer-based service like Dropbox. We're taking that and creating some enterprise parameters around that. We're making the product extensible. So we've got, an open API set. We're going to integrate, as we're going to talk through today, with your IT infrastructure. So as you look to add file sync and share to the list of services that you want to offer your end users, we're going to provide you with a platform to be able to do that. That's going to provide data security. That's going to provide you with all of those things that are missing in the consumer-grade products, and really give you the ability to go ahead and drop that into your existing infrastructure, make it simple, and really make your end users more productive, which is really the goal of setting something like this up. The components of ownCloud, and again, part of today's discussion is going to be getting into these a little deeper, but the ownCloud server. So we actually have an application server that can run on Windows, Linux, with an Apache or IIS backend. That's going to be the brains of the operation. That's where all of the logic as an administrator you're going to be able to set up around what features and functionality are going to be available to users. Can users share files? What type of integration am I going to set up in terms of authentication? Do I want to use an LDAP backend? Do I want to use a single sign-on solution like SAML? And then as we move further down, we start looking at ways that your customers or users are going to interact with ownCloud. So we look at our iOS and Android apps. So we have the ability to go ahead and make those files available on a mobile device. We also have our Windows, Mac, and Linux desktop clients. So if you want to create a sync relationship between the private cloud and your desktop, you can do that, making it very, very simple for your end users, but also making it easy for you as an administrator to do things like distribute this software, set up these syncs. So if you have group policies set up or some other form of policy in like a script logic or a LAN desk or something along those lines that's going to allow you to go ahead and distribute software and manage desktop policy, all that can be done and set up through the Mac client or the Windows or Linux client for your end user to be able to interact with the ownCloud server. So with that said, guys, and with a quick sort of refresher on what ownCloud is, I wanted to talk in more detail about the elements of ownCloud, because if you're going to look to deploy something like this, we want to make sure that you understand sort of the three elements that are associated with this. Obviously, first is the ownCloud server, which is our application server. That's going to be the primary interface for the ownCloud administration panel. So that's done through a browser. You'd log in as an administrator and actually be able to control things like app enablement. So which apps are turned on, which apps are turned off, what level of sharing do I want to allow, what level of authentication or what type of authentication do I want to use. So that's going to be the primary interface for that. Obviously, users are going to interact with the server through some form of integration with your existing authentication system. So do you want to use an LDAP or Active Directory backend? Do you want to use a shibboleth or SAML sort of single sign-on type of solution? So that's all configured at the ownCloud server side. This is also where you're going to manage the upgrade process. So you're going to manage how the software is updated and upgraded as ownCloud releases additional releases of the software, adds fixes and patches. You're going to go ahead and do this all at the server level. And then obviously, the ownCloud server side, when you're going to deploy this, you have to make some decisions around, what platform do you want to deploy on? So do you want to deploy on a Windows platform with IIS? Do you want to deploy on a Linux platform with Apache? All are supported here from that perspective. And then obviously things like storage. We talk a little bit later in the presentation about storage integration. We have this concept of default storage for ownCloud that's going to be presented to the application server or servers. Ultimately, this is also where the existing storage integration is going to happen as well. So your ownCloud servers have the ability to go out and connect to a Windows file server that may exist, an FTP server that may already exist. Without having to forklift all those files up into a new storage repository, we can actually index them where they live and actually allow or gateway access to those files based on the ownCloud server. The second element here that I like to talk to folks about is the database. Now, obviously, managing the database as part of any application is going to involve things like regular database backups. Now, we support MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle. These are the enterprise databases that we actually support and you can actually connect up to. Doing things like monitoring database size, things like monitoring database health. These are all things that come along with deploying, but for the purpose of sort of getting started, you really have to make a choice around which database you want to start with. And really, for a lot of us, that's predetermined based on corporate standards. So if my corporate standard is SQL Server or my corporate standard is Oracle, that choice is typically made for me. And as part of an administrator getting started, you're simply going to put in a request to the DBA group to have a database provision or a user space provision that you can go ahead and link your ownCloud app up to. The database is actually a critical part of our application, so you want to make sure that you size it correctly. And those are all pieces that you want to come to ownCloud and get advice. Part of a subscription is being able to work with you to be able to deploy this correctly and to scale. But as part of a simple getting started, making that database decision is going to be part of the critical path to a successful deployment. And then ultimately there are the ownCloud clients. So when I talk about ownCloud clients, I sort of lump in desktop and mobile, but really any aspect that is going to be used to allow end users to interact with their files. And so obviously we have our sync client, we have our mobile application, we have the browser interface. So, users are going to be able to interact based on the browser that you've given them, whether it be IE, Firefox, Chrome, whatever that situation might be. For Mac shops, it might be Safari. They'll be able to interact with files that way. The other thing we can do, and we're going to talk about this again a little later in the presentation, is do things like WebDAV mounts. So it's rather than a synchronization type of relationship, if your users want more of a mounted drive to ownCloud, we certainly can do that as well. And again, guys, what I'm attempting to do here is sort of paint a picture of some of the things that you need to be thinking about as you're thinking about or considering an ownCloud deployment and some of the elements that are involved in doing this. Now, one of the things that I always like to sort of cut to the chase on here is, all right, how do I stand up ownCloud? How do I get an instance up and running? There are a couple of different ways to go about doing this. For a simple server-side architecture, 1 to 50 users, for these types of small deployments or for a trial of ownCloud, we can do, or you can do, an all-in-one deployment where you have basically the entire stack residing on one machine. So, a LAMP stack type of deployment where you're using local storage, MySQL, and Apache running in the Linux environment all in the same box. We are able to support that with everything running on the same box. We actually have a virtual appliance that's out there now that you can download that would allow you to go ahead and stand something like this up. Again, caution in terms of the scale of something like this, but certainly if you're looking to stand up a trial of ownCloud, this is the way to go about it. Quick, simple installation, up and running in a very, very short period of time. The medium-sized deployments, when we start talking about, 50 plus to 500, 600 users, somewhere in that neighborhood, now we start talking about sort of teasing the elements apart and actually having a separate application layer, a separate database layer, and a separate storage layer. In these types of instances, or these types of sort of mid-range deployments, you can go ahead and have maybe a single application server or maybe 2 application servers behind a load balancer running a single database instance, and an iSCSI mount being mounted to the application server, or using DFS or NFS depending on how you want to serve up that storage. But again, other than the separation of the tiers, the deployment is still relatively flat, relatively simple to manage. You're simply just extracting these things out so that you can size your database server, size your storage accordingly, and not have that tied directly to the application server. And then obviously when we start getting into the larger scale deployments, when we start talking about 500, 600, 700 and up users, now we're talking about a scenario where I want to go ahead and actually scale my application server. So I want to go ahead and basically make sure that I've got enough application servers sitting behind a load balancer that I can handle that traffic. The same thing with my storage. I need to change my approach to storage and make sure that I'm making extensible decisions around storage and presenting that in such a way where I can present the same storage to multiple application servers. For example, using something like Red Hat storage in a Gluster file system is a great way to go ahead and actually present storage to your application layer that you can certainly scale. And then the same thing with the database. When we start thinking about databases and sizing databases and giving your DBAs some sense for what that database should look like, and ultimately, setting up things like database clusters and starting to think about availability and disaster recovery. These are all elements that we want to get into as we start to look at these larger scale deployments. And again, these are all things that, as you know, from a getting started perspective, you want to look at the top of that simple server-side architecture. As you start to move sort of down here, we start looking at our larger customers that have subscribed to support and want the services and expertise that ownCloud has to offer to actually walk you through how to go ahead and architect a solution like this. Another very rudimentary question that I want to make sure we get answered here and you walk away from is, where do I download the software? You know, and it's often overlooked in these types of presentations because I could do the greatest job possible in terms of selling you on the fact that this is a great solution to stand up, but if I don't tell you where to go to get it, it's for naught. So you can go to our website, ownCloud.com/downloads. That's where you're going to be able to find the virtual appliances. We have a virtual appliance out there right now, a single virtual appliance that's based on SUSE Linux and the LAMP stack. It's an all-in-one, you know, the application server, the storage, and the database server are all sitting in that appliance. You know, again, we'll support small-scale deployments, perfect for an ownCloud trial if you want to deploy this to 20, 25 people to get a feel for it. We also make the software binaries available out there, so you can actually download this and start the process of actually architecting your own ownCloud. So if you wanted to do that in a lab setting, you certainly could do that. We also have the client-side software that's out there as well. So if I want to go ahead and through a GPO or through some other software distribution channel push ownCloud client-side software out to 20 people, I can do that. I can get the binaries that I need here as well to go ahead and push that out. And then obviously our mobile apps, you know, whether it be iOS or Android, are available through the respective app stores. So if you do a search for ownCloud, you'll see the ownCloud application out there. You can download that and start interacting with the ownCloud server that you've got stood up right on your mobile device. Again, fairly straightforward. So the other thing that I wanted to spend some time on here today, and you know, obviously a great deal of the presentation so far has been dedicated to the administrative sides of standing up ownCloud and what's all involved and how to go about doing it. But I want to spend a few minutes on client-side interaction with ownCloud. Obviously, we're standing this thing up to make it easier for our end users to be able to access unstructured data in our enterprises. So we want to make sure that they have a very simple interface and they understand completely in terms of how to go about getting access to those things. So first is our browser interaction. That's the simplest form of access. We give them a URL, they log in. Now they'll log in depending on the decisions that you've made for access. They'll log in and they'll see their files. They'll be able to actually browse their files. They'll be able to get access to the files, upload files, share files with other folks, delete files. All of that stuff can be done directly through the browser. And the nice part about this is that this gives them the level of access from whatever machine they happen to be on. So if I happen to be on my laptop, you know, in my office, but if I'm over in Jim's office and I need quick access to a file, I can simply jump on his machine, log in, and download the file for him, right? Easy, simple, access to it anywhere. The ownCloud Sync client is yet another experience where I can actually create a synchronization relationship between a folder on my PC and my private cloud or my ownCloud. So my ownCloud account where I want to make this file and I want to make sure that this folder on my desktop has files in it that I want to make sure I can access from any place, from my mobile device, from my device at home, through the browser. So I can set that relationship up so that anything that I drop into that folder will get pushed up to ownCloud, and then from there it's available via all of those channels. The WebDAV mount. So the other thing that we offer, guys, is the ability to create the WebDAV mount. Now, this is for those users that are looking for more of a mounted drive experience. So I want to make sure that I have access to my files from the browser, from my mobile device, but I'm not nuts about the sync client thing. I want to basically be able to copy a file over and just delete it, right? I want to put it up there and forget about it. I don't want it to live on my PC anymore. So if your users are accustomed to sort of that mounted drive experience, we can actually recreate that here as well. And then finally, the mobile apps. Again, users can access their files through the mobile apps. If they have something like Quick Office on their mobile device, they can manipulate Word files, manipulate Excel, manipulate PowerPoints, save that stuff, and it will actually get pushed back up to ownCloud. So again, from that user experience perspective, those are sort of the ways that your end users will get started with ownCloud. Now, I talked a little bit about this just before, and I'm sure that a lot of you are sitting out there thinking to yourself, boy, this all sounds great, but, I've got an existing infrastructure, and, one of the key concerns I have here is how does this thing integrate with that existing infrastructure? And so I want to take a few minutes to talk about that. So things like user authorization, most of the time, you're going to have some form of directory structure. So you're going to have, say an LDAP or Active Directory, Open LDAP, something along those lines that you use to manage user credentials. We actually can tie directly into that and allow you to define right down to the group who actually is going to have access to ownCloud. So if you want to give certain members of your organization access and certain members won't have access, that's fine. You can certainly manage it that way. We offer the ability to use things like SAML or some other single sign-on solution that supports SAML. So, if you have a single sign-on situation going on that's not LDAP-based and you want to use that, please reach out to us. We actually have a lot of the underpinnings for that with SAML, Shibboleth, those types of scenarios we can actually support out of the box today with a short conversation with you in terms of understanding how it's architected. So the ability to go ahead and drop something in and give users access is fairly well covered through these two types of scenarios. The next big piece here is, we don't run across a lot of greenfields. There's not a lot of companies out there that are, just now starting to accumulate unstructured data. Most of you will have Windows file servers, Samba servers, FTP servers, all forms of access to unstructured data in your environment. And we actually have taken paid a lot of attention, I guess you could say, to that in making sure that we are integratable into those types of environments. For example, being able to create a SMB mount in an ownCloud server and then actually controlling who has access to that. Being able to actually mount LDAP-based home directories inside of ownCloud automatically is something we've got covered. And again, when I say this, guys, I'm not talking about having to take that directory structure and copy all that data over to a new set of storage. Just point ownCloud to it. We'll index it. We'll put it in our file cache. We'll actually manage if a user clicks on a file, ownCloud will get that request. We'll go out to the existing storage repository and bring that file back through. So there's really no need to do any kind of forklift, any kind of massive data movements. We can actually access everything where it lives. And then, for things like supporting group policies, so group policies through Windows or some other software or configuration distribution so that we can actually automate the process of creating WebDAV mounts for map drives, distributing sync client configuration. So if you want to standardize a folder on the desktop with a folder sitting on ownCloud for every single user, so at a minimum that's what they get, we can actually, through a group policy, push out those types of configuration files once the software is installed on the desktop. So all of that stuff fits nicely into that existing infrastructure. And then obviously we offer some other API interfaces. So if you have, for example, an experience where you want people to come register for this service, so you want to create a custom web-based front end where I'm going to come and sign up for this, we actually can then take that data that they input on the front end and actually pass that through API calls back to ownCloud to actually create users inside of ownCloud. So if you want to do that, you certainly can. We also have a number of integrations with other platforms. I use Jive here as an example. Jive is, a enterprise-level social media platform that allows, sort of a social media experience to people within an enterprise to allow them to share ideas and collaborate. Well, we actually have plugins to those types of solutions so that we can bring file sync and share to that. So if you on here, let us know. Reach out to us. Creating custom plugins is an aspect of our company that we are able to do or able to go ahead and deliver and make or add file sync and share solutions to your existing infrastructure. Now, guys, as we sort of wind down the presentation piece here, if you're interested in setting up ownCloud, we offer a lot of flexible trial options. So if you reach out to us and say, hey, I'm not positive this is the right solution for me, I'd like to set it up for 20, 25 people, we can offer you the level of guidance that you need to get this thing stood up, get it out there, get it in the hands of users, start collecting feedback from those users. We offer fully blown supported POCs, so if you want to purchase a shorter amount of support from us just to do, say, a full-scale proof of concept to, say, 500, 1,000 users, we offer that as well. So those packages are available. We're extremely flexible in sort of how you can work with us. And if you need more information on the nuts and bolts of how this works, so if you're not somebody that wants to deploy it in a simple appliance, so the simple appliance that we've put together isn't going to scale based on what your plans are, contact us directly. We've got a lot of experts on staff here that are really good at, and sort of specialize in giving you the details around the subscription options available to you, what it's going to take to scale ownCloud out to support the type of deployment that you're looking for. We have all of that information available for you. We can go ahead and engage with you on the phone and really sort of give you the kind of guidance that you need to guarantee a successful installation of ownCloud. There we go. I think I skipped a slide there. Okay, so to back up for a sec, guys, just to sort of summarize what we covered today. We covered the key elements of ownCloud. What are the key pieces? And that's sort of that three-tiered architecture, the application server, the database, and the storage. How do I get the software? So how do I go about getting my hands on this thing? It all sounds great. I want to grab it. I want to download it. I want to set it up, and I want to get it running. We've given you the pointers to be able to do that. What do I need to roll out ownCloud? Well, we've given you some of that information here. Some of it requires more of a two-way dialogue. So we would invite you to engage us in that. If you have hopefully we've answered some of the basic questions in terms of what's required. But if you have specifics or you want more detail, we would encourage engaging us here in a two-way dialogue so we can go ahead and get that rolling. How are my users going to interact with ownCloud? So part of a process of sort of understanding whether or not this could be the right solution is understanding whether or not it's going to meet the needs of your end user. Hopefully, we've given you enough of that information, and if you're still not positive, again, I'd encourage you to engage us. Talk to us a little bit about what problem you're trying to solve as it relates to that access to unstructured data in the enterprise, and hopefully we can come to some sort of consensus together and put a plan together to move forward to get you rolled out. Easy setup, quick to stand up, ownCloud in your enterprise. So we have that concept of the virtual appliance. We want to make this simple. Deploy it, get it out to, say, 10 or 15 people. Maybe there's 3 or 4 people in your IT department that can sort of smoke test this. But we want to make it as easy as possible to get the software in your hands, get it up and running. And I guess the last thing I want to leave you with as far as the summary, we're here to help. ownCloud.com, or the commercial entity of ownCloud, actually exists solely for getting you up and running. So that's our job. That's our entire job, is to make sure that you have a good experience. We support you. We leave you with the impression that this is the right solution and that you want to go ahead and actually do business with us. And, obviously, guys, the last piece here is, in terms of don't take our word for it. Again, another commercial for downloading the appliance, getting it stood up, and seeing how simple it can be. Before I turn this over to start taking questions, a couple things I wanted to talk about are, sort of enterprise versus community. We get this question a lot from users, and they always ask, how do I know whether or not I should be a community user or an enterprise user? And hopefully this provides some guidance, this sort of grid, in terms of helping you understand what bucket you might fit into. Obviously, if your user volume is under 50 users, you may be a candidate for the Community Edition. However, we'd like to talk to you about it because there are a lot of features and functionality that are involved in using the Enterprise Edition that we think could be helpful or actually will provide some level of value for you, even in a small deployment. But really what we want to do here is make sure that you take away the differences and some of the broad strokes around what bucket you might fall into. And again, we'd always encourage you to contact us if you have questions. Contact one of our reps, give him or her the details of what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll make sure we steer you in that right direction. So with that said, guys, I want to sort of stop here and take some questions. I'm going to flip it over to the actual, there we go, there's our contact information. I want to make sure I leave it on that before I pause the screen share and actually start looking at some of the questions that may be out there. So let me go ahead and start browsing through those. Just bear with me for a moment. So the first question I have is, can we use SAN storage just by pointing the data path to the SAN storage? You certainly can. So when you're talking about pointing ownCloud at remote storage, there are really two ways to go about doing this. One is to go through the process of actually mounting that storage on the ownCloud server. And, if you're using, say, something like an NFS mount in Linux, or maybe DFS or an iSCSI mount in Windows, you can certainly go ahead and do that. If you want to connect to it directly, the one thing you have to make sure you do is your whatever user is used for anonymous access by your web server has to be authorized on your storage mount. Otherwise, you can simply go ahead and mount the storage and make it appear as a local storage mount to ownCloud. But certainly accessing it over the network is possible. You just have to make sure that the security settings are there. Let's see here. Can the client-side software GUI be customized with my company logo and such? The short answer to that question is absolutely. We actually offer an ownCloud branding subscription that will allow you to not only customize the web interface, but also the client-side software like the Sync client and the mobile device clients. So you certainly can do that. It can be customized if you purchase that level of subscription. Let's see here. Is the data stored encrypted? Do the users create their own keys? So this is interesting, guys, and I'm going to take the opportunity here to walk you through sort of the end-to-end encryption story. Obviously, it starts off with the data at rest, and we have an app called the Enterprise Encryption Application, which actually will encrypt the data as it lives on the default storage. The users themselves actually have the key that is used to decrypt that is their password. So we actually use their password to decrypt that data. What this does is if a admin logs into the server itself and tries to view the files as they live on the file system, they won't be able to do that. It actually requires a user-based login to log in and decrypt those files. The second phase of that obviously is the data in transport, which is another thing that we support. You simply need to go ahead and implement SSL there on the server, so secure socket layer connection between the client and the server. And then obviously any encryption that gets done on the client side is actually managed by the customer. So if you want to implement BitLock or some other whole disk encryption on the client side, you certainly can do that, and that's supported. So let me come down here and see if we've got. The next question here is, where can I find out how to utilize WebDAV mounted drives? So this is a great question, and we actually offer the ability to go ahead and do that. If you log in as an ownCloud user and click on the personal page, under WebDAV, you'll see the URL that you need to do to actually access this via WebDAV. So if you have a WebDAV client like NetDrive or WebDrive, you can use that URL. In a Windows instance, there are a couple of steps you have to take, and as an administrator, there is a patch you have to push out, and then a registry update you have to push out, and then ultimately you can use that URL to mount and assign it a drive letter. We actually have some documentation, so the person that asked this question, we'll make sure that a rep follows up with you and gets the specific documentation out to you for that. Let's see here. The next question I have is, let me just make sure I get the full question. I've deployed a simple Netgear Ready NAS storage solution and would love to be able to simply make available the shares through ownCloud. That is absolutely possible. There are a number of different ways to be able to do that specifically for this user. And we'll reach out to you specifically, Alan, and get back to you on setting up a time to talk about exactly how to go about doing that, but you certainly can do that. Let's see here. The next question I have is one of scale. How many servers would be needed for a large deployment, say, for example, 2,000 users? That is an excellent question, and actually requires a little bit of back and forth discussion because there are some assumptions that we'll make. The good news here is that we can actually scale the various elements of ownCloud independently. So, for example, we may need to scale the application layer, and for sake of argument, we could actually make the application layer scale dynamic because the ownCloud code is stateless, and it simply consists of a configuration file that points at a database and points at storage. We could actually scale that up depending on the activity, some assumptions we'll make around the activity of those end users. And so for the person that asked this question, we should engage in a conversation around scaling the application tier, scaling the storage, and scaling the database tier. But we absolutely have those answers for you, and we want to ask you a couple of questions before we actually gave some blanket answers. Guys, any questions on subscription pricing and schedules? I'm just a technical guy. But we are going to hand this stuff over to account managers who will reach out to you and give you that information. So we'll make sure that if you have a question on that or if you put something in there, I'm not ignoring you. I simply want to make sure that we get you in the hands of the right folks. Let's see here. Is the ownCloud translated into French? We actually do have a French translation. We actually have through a solution out there, and the name escapes me, but we have ownCloud through an open source solution that's been translated into a number of different languages, French being one of them. And again, we'll follow up with you to make sure we get you the details around that particular piece. Let's see here. Is it possible to set up redundant ownCloud servers that mirror each other? Let me get to the full question here. In case one site goes down. Absolutely. In terms of being able to deploy this, again, standing up multiple application servers behind a load balancer is a way that you can ensure application continuity. Doing things like block level data replication on the storage side is a way, and then using things like multipath I/O is a supportive way to go about ensuring data continuity or availability. And then on the database side, taking the database of your choice and implementing a database cluster is another way to ensure database continuity. And then obviously taking any one of those elements and doing things like asynchronous replication over to a second site is yet another way to go ahead and do that. So very, very straightforward. And guys, I think that the last question I'm going to take is, can we use a hardware load balancer such as F5? The short answer there is absolutely, and we can talk in a little bit more detail about how to do that. So guys, I know that there are other questions that continue to stream in, and I think that I'm going to stop there. I know that there was one person out there that had a question in terms of setting up redundant ownCloud servers, and I don't think you were quite happy with my answer, Jay. We're certainly happy to talk to you in more detail about your infrastructure and make sure we make it work. Guys, we would absolutely want to continue to field those questions, so continue to stream them in here. I'm going to stop answering questions and let everyone get back to their day. We absolutely and really do appreciate you coming out to these events because these types of questions and these types of things help us sort of set the direction for the product. It's always great to be able to take the pulse of people that are interested in setting something like this up. Obviously, I put our contact information up here on a slide. If you have additional questions, want additional information, or actually just want to sit down and talk about it. I know it's hard to give you everything you need in a PowerPoint, so some of you may just want to sit down and talk. We're happy to do that, so just reach out to us and let us know. Again, appreciate everyone's time this afternoon, and hope to talk to you all again real soon. Thank you.